And to us who are out here doing it, it's like, oh, well, yeah, well, of course. But they're not prepared to take care of themselves. And so we're waiting until my folks in my cohort are typically 8, 10, 15 years in. We want to get to taking care of folks and giving them tools at year 0, year -2, so they know, like, yeah, like, so they understand boundaries, which we talk about. So they understand finding joy and liberation. So they don't understand racial battle fatigue, so that it doesn't sneak up on them. So yes to higher ed for folks who are in higher education. That's a great goal for us to have. But as far as like the being able to pay for those things and funding and how do we use our grants wisely and how do we make our connections
Yeah.
wisely, we want to work with pre-service educators first.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. And I love that you're thinking about individuals, at zero, as they're finishing up their education, doing their student teaching or placement
Yeah.
or practicums and
Yeah.
everything. Because it probably is I can't even imagine what a shock it is when they go into a classroom environment and then deal with racism that they weren't maybe dealing with it differently on campus, but going out to that first time in a practicum and
Yeah. The shock. I think that's a part of it, right? Is seeing educators kind of behind the scenes. Where it's one thing they used to be in front of the educator as a student, but now they get to see them when they're grading papers and hearing them talk about Black and brown kids, right? And hearing them say these things that are like a gut punch. Like, how do you, then you realize like, oh, these folks are just like the folks at the bank and the folks at the King Supers and these are just regular folks who have like, and sometimes like limited thinking and belief about Black people. And like, what do I do with that as a teacher who doesn't want to get in trouble because I need this practicum or I need this job, but I want to advocate too for my students, and how do I take care of myself in between? So that's why it's so important. And we've been really trying to talk to universities about partnership and them paying for it, right? And saying like, hey, can we come on board to support your folks? And so hopefully that will be the next phase of our work.
that's good.
Thank you.
That's really good. That's really good. I feel that, those of us that go into education feel that there's maybe a higher moral ground in education, that educators are going to treat people well and are there to help everyone. And then you get that bucket of cold water thrown on you when you do hear someone making derogatory comments about a student of color,
Yes.
or treating colleagues that are of color poorly in a racist manner. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Thank you for unpacking that.
Yeah,
Really,
of
really
course.
appreciate that.
Yeah, of course.
Now, I know you have your podcast and I love it, and I try to catch clips of it when I can. And one thing that really struck me that you said earlier is that the right to tell your story. And that was one reason why I started Innovation Insights too, is that we all have a story. We have a right to tell our story because many others tell stories about us, and sometimes they're not very flattering, favorable, or truthful.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Tell us about your podcast. And again, I love that you're looking at educators that have decided to leave and having them tell their stories.
Yeah, so the podcast, I'll start with the why. That year that I left education, or at least in K-12 in that traditional sense, that summer I emailed my assistant, or I emailed my superintendent and said, no, I'm demanding an exit interview from you. Like, I'm not gonna leave, be pushed out of education, and you're just gonna continue hiring and harming Black people. And after several emails, he finally responded and said, okay, let's do an exit interview. So the superintendent, and they don't offer exit interviews in that district to this day, and that was 2018. And so I had an exit interview. I had my list of things I wanted to say, and I said everything on that list because I'm like, he's gonna hear all my 2 cents. And of course, his response was, we in the such and such school district are striving for excellence. And I didn't expect for him to think that what I was saying was going to be groundbreaking and he's gonna change his ways. The point was that I said what I needed to say, and so when I walked out of out of that exit interview, I was walking back to my car and I thought, there's so many Black folks who leave education and never share our story. Either we're offered an exit interview and we don't share the full thing because maybe we want to get a job again and we don't want to burn bridges, or we're not offered anything, or we run away and because I don't want to talk about it, I don't want to think about it. And so the podcast came from that why of like, there's so many of us whose stories deserve to be archived, especially when we feel like there's so much money, there's so much focus on recruitment, and there's never this collection of exits of like why you couldn't retain Black folks. And so that's why the podcast exists, to say you can't say that you didn't know why we're leaving. Because here, and today is March 20th, here's 60 plus episodes so far to tell you exactly why people have left and what they believe that you all can do to keep us. So that's why I exist. That's who I interview. And I also talk to and interview folks who are in counseling and therapy to say, hey, I got folks listening to this podcast who are healing from harm in the workplace, or who are going and want to just kind of think about how to be like just well. And I asked folks, like I talked about Dr. Jen Wright and Dr. Smith, like what people can do to be well. So it's a small amount of folks who are healers and therapists, but mostly it's Black folks who've left education, higher ed, ECE, K-12.
Do you know of any statistics about how many Blacks are leaving education? I haven't looked any up, and I'm really curious,
Yeah.
now. Yeah.
I would say that I don't know if anyone really has like a solid guess. And the reason why I say that is because I was talking to one of my good friends, Jaleesa, who runs the Black Educator Advocates Network out of California. And a part of the work that she's doing for policy change is that they don't have on open record, the California Department of Education, how many Black folks are in education. So they don't even have an account. So how could we know who's leaving
Right.
if we don't have a count of how many people are there? And so, yeah, that's interesting information to know. And maybe, of course, different states have different data, but across the United States, unless people are counting us and watching those numbers shift, we will never know how many of us are leaving education.
No. No.
Yeah.
And this is the cynic in me. It's probably data that people don't want to know.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. People like, we should have more exit interviews. Why don't we have exit interviews? If you think about it, if you have exit interviews for every person who left education, and let's just drill down to Black folks, and in a school district, if out of 50 Black people who left that district in a year, 10 or 15 of them name the same person, and you were able to pull a core report and say like, oh, this person's causing, you have evidence. And why would a district want to hold evidence of racism and trauma that they're supporting? So if you don't have the evidence, then no one can say, let's pull it out. There's nothing to pull out. They know what's happening. They know who's leaving and why, but there's no record to keep them from getting in trouble. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah, that knowledge is power, that data can be power, and no, we don't want that.
Yeah.
So what are some of the themes that have come up for the reason why people are leaving why are Black educators leaving?
Yeah. So one of a small amount talk about pay.